All right, are you ready to have some fun? Because we're talking about cannabis, and it should be fun, I think, don't you? Well, it is. The business that we work in is the most fun I've ever had in my career. My name is Cam Batley. I am the Chief Corporate Officer of Aurora Cannabis. The slide says Mark Lockmacher. He's my sidekick and friend. He's our head of investor relations, but they decided to send me to this thing instead. So I'm very happy to be here in Germany and in Frankfurt, a country that Aurora loves very much. You may or may not know that we are supplying Canadian-grown cannabis to the German medical system. And Germany matters to us very, very much. Germany is very soon, we believe, going to be the largest federally legal or nationally legal medical cannabis market in the world. And more than that, Germany has taken a very progressive approach to medical cannabis in that most patients are receiving insurance reimbursement. And that's the way it should be. This is a gesture of leadership on behalf of Germany, treating medical cannabis as it should be treated, the same as any other prescription drug. Now in Canada, you may know that we've had a very smoothly operating, very effective medical cannabis system in place for 4 years. It has a lot of patients in it, about 350,000. But very few of them have achieved insurance reimbursement, so they're paying out of pocket for this. It's something that we really have to work on. It's something that we have to lobby the Canadian government about, and the provincial governments, and the private insurers. So Germany already has a head start in one very important respect. And the larger picture in Europe is, again, an opportunity for Germany to lead. How often have you heard that in the last few years? Everybody's relying on Germany to lead Europe. I know, we watch from Canada. But this is another opportunity, again, for the wisdom and the efficiency and the capabilities and leadership of Germany to step to the fore. Because other countries are now following. We have a cascade of new medical cannabis systems being established in Europe. And even some countries that, until recently, we would never have suspected. The UK. At the beginning of 2018, nobody expected the United Kingdom to have a medical cannabis market. When asked, the UK government kept saying, no, no, no. There's no evidence, we don't believe in it, it's not going to happen. But cannabis is an interesting animal. People's attitudes can change very, very quickly. And what happened in the United Kingdom was a very telling example. The media started to tell the stories of 2 very sick little boys who had epilepsy and were illegally using cannabis to manage the seizures from their condition. And all of a sudden, public sympathy changed things very, very quickly. All of a sudden, the United Kingdom said, okay, maybe we will create a medical cannabis system. And now there are loud voices in Britain who are saying, let's not just create a small medical cannabis system, let's create a world-class medical system, and let's benefit from the economy that can develop. Now that's smart thinking, and that's the kind of thinking that I like to hear in Germany. That's the kind of conversation I like to have with policymakers and opinion leaders and business leaders in Germany. Let's look at the big picture. The benefits of this new economy of medical cannabis, followed at some point in the future by consumer cannabis legalization, are enormous. We're talking about massive new investment, massive new economic spin-off benefits, huge new employment gains, and massive new innovation. And that innovation and all of those other benefits will occur in the countries that invest in the cannabis industry and also establish a framework for the legal use of cannabis. First, on a medical basis, and ultimately on a legal consumer legalization basis. And on that point, let me pause for a minute to acknowledge something very important that's just happened in Canada. Does anybody know what it is? We've legalized cannabis for consumer use in Canada. We've just done it. We're the second country in the world to do so after Uruguay, and the first of the G20 countries. And we're doing it big. There are more than 120 licensed producers in Canada, regulated by Health Canada. Only a handful of them are true players that will go on to become global players. And I see some of them right in front of me right now. There's one right there, CanTrust. They're going to be a player. Most will not. Let's not fool ourselves. We're creating a new industry, and at the outset of any new industry, you will see a large number of companies as startups. But the ones that survive, the small number that survive, will have some very special things about them. Now let me talk to you about Aurora. How many of you are familiar with Aurora already? It's an amazing company. It's an amazing company. I joined Aurora, I came over from a competitor, Canopy, in March of 2016. And at that time, Aurora had 35 employees and had just started to sell medical cannabis. Aurora was a year and a half behind all of the other players, all of the major competitors. We call them the Blessed 13, the first 13 companies to get their licenses from Health Canada. Aurora didn't receive its licenses until 18 months after everybody else. But we've come roaring by them. And so from the 35 employees that Aurora had when I joined them just 2.5 years ago, we now have more than 1,600 around the world. And we're operating in 18 countries. And our production has gone through the roof. We've gone from one small facility north of Calgary in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains to 8 operating facilities across Canada and 1 in Denmark. And we're expanding around the world. And we're going to be in every single market in the world where cannabis is legal on any basis, whether for CBD or cannabidiol only. Does everybody know what CBD is? The primary non-intoxicating compound in cannabis. Whether it be CBD only, whether it be a full slate of medical cannabis products, and ultimately, what we know is going to happen. A cascade of additional countries opening themselves up to consumer legalization. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. And I'll tell you how it's going to happen. It's going to happen because we will see the same phenomenon that applied in Canada apply in country after country. First, you establish a medical cannabis system. It becomes legitimate. People become comfortable with it. Once your grandmother and your uncle are using medical cannabis to manage their arthritis pain, suddenly the substance is not so scary. Suddenly the stigma starts to lift off the substance. Suddenly society starts thinking about cannabis differently. Suddenly people start to pay attention to the data that show that cannabis is in fact a safer substance than alcohol. It's a more benign substance than alcohol on both an individual health impact basis and on a societal impact basis. And then countries are going to start to think differently about cannabis. And they're going to be asking themselves some hard questions and some very important questions, starting with, should we be criminally prosecuting people for using cannabis? That's a question I'm starting to hear asked in Germany, to this country's great credit. And it's my belief that Germany will be one of the first countries to make a rational decision based on sound, intelligent public policy to proceed with consumer legalization. Because once you ask yourself that question, should we be putting people in jail for using cannabis? The answer is pretty obvious. It's not justifiable. Now, in Canada, we have an additional problem with the criminal prohibition of cannabis, or at least we did until this past week. And that is that the law criminally prohibiting cannabis was not ineffective, or it was ineffective. It didn't work. We already had millions of people, just like in Germany, who used cannabis on a regular basis. The law wasn't working. It was ineffective. But worse than that was that ineffective law was unevenly and unfairly applied. And you know what happens whenever a law is unevenly and unfairly applied. It hurts minorities more than everybody else. So in Canada, the impact of criminal prohibition fell disproportionately on Canadians of color and Indigenous Canadians and low-income Canadians, not white middle-class people. We are in the process of fixing some of the impact of that. First, we've now legalized cannabis for consumer use, and that's a good thing. But there's a fight ahead, and that is to clean up the historical injustices. So one of the things that we are doing at Aurora is supporting something called the Campaign for Cannabis Amnesty. And this is a wonderful group of people. It's a group of idealistic young lawyers and activists who are lobbying the federal government in Canada to have those criminal records of those charged and convicted of non-violent cannabis offenses not just pardoned, but eliminated. It's called expungement in English. And what that means is it's the equivalent of wiping it away so that that criminal record never happened. And this is critically important because these people who have been charged or convicted of cannabis possession, committing no dangerous act, they are affected for their whole lives. Their whole lives, they are limited from traveling. You can't enter the United States if you've been charged or convicted for cannabis possession. They have difficulty with employment because when a background check is done on you, you have a criminal record. They have difficulty with housing, getting an apartment, buying a property. They even have difficulty volunteering, engaging in volunteer activities, all because of that. What I want you to do is imagine the future. I've given you a bunch of facts and some new developments, but I want you to imagine the future. And specifically, I want you to imagine the scale, the global scale that we are going to achieve with this industry. Right now, the cannabis industry is at a level, it will never be so small again. It's only going to get bigger, and it's going to get a lot bigger. And we aren't globally, the world isn't paying quite as much attention to it right now as it would if this were a phenomenon that were happening out of the United States, right? It's happening out of Canada. And as a result, so far, there's a little bit of a discount because not everybody's aware of what's going on. But let's talk about what is going on. Make no mistake, this is a revolution, a positive revolution that has just started. A spark in Canada is going to catch fire around the world. It's going to be big. This is part of what I would classify as a global megatrend, a significant shift in society, in law, in business, and in industry. And it's going to change a lot of things, and it's going to change those things for the better. It's going to create new opportunities. It's going to create new economies. And it will sweep the world. And at the same time, it's going to disrupt a lot of existing industries. Think of the brewing industry. There are clear indications already in the US states that have legalized cannabis for consumer use that cannabis is disrupting the beer industry. There is a certain substitution effect in play. Who knows if that'll happen in Germany? I know you guys really love your beer. Actually, I love your beer too. There is disruption happening on the pharmaceutical side. Cannabis is being used, and used effectively, as an alternative to opioids for certain patients, not for the most serious pain. Opioids were designed initially for the most serious forms of pain, cancer pain, fractures, certain kinds of post-surgical pain. But we know what happened in the 1990s, don't we? They started to be used a lot more broadly. It's what created a very deadly opioid crisis in country after country, because certain pharmaceutical companies, and I like the pharmaceutical industry, that was my whole career up until 4 years ago. In fact, I worked for the CEO of Bayer in Berlin. I love the pharmaceutical industry, but certain pharmaceutical companies in the 1990s saw an opportunity to promote the use of opioids for moderate pain and chronic pain for indications that they should not have been used for. And that created a cascade of addiction and too many deaths. And frankly, I think that those companies should be held to account for what they've done. But now, in countries that do have a major crisis with opioids, we also have an alternative. Cannabis, in its various formulations, can be used by some patients with moderate or chronic pain to manage those conditions without opioids. It can also be used, cannabis can also be used for something known as opioid sparing, which means the adjunctive, the use at the same time of opioids and cannabinoids. And the effect of that is to reduce the required dosage of opioids, thereby reducing the side effects and reducing the risk of dependence. Cannabis is disrupting existing industries. And if you want to know how big it is, I'll tell you how big I think it's going to be, and in the not too distant future. I firmly believe that you will see the cannabis sector globally, led by a handful of Canadian companies that have a big lead, become bigger than the global brewing industry, and I'll tell you why. One, there is a medical component to cannabis, a clear and supportable medical component. And we can't say that for beer, no matter what we might tell ourselves on a Friday afternoon, or a Sunday afternoon. I mean, I don't want to stop you from drinking beer today. That medical component is significant. The second reason why I think it's going to be this big globally is that once countries start to legalize cannabis for consumer use, and that is an unstoppable trend, there's no going back, we will become aware that cannabis has certain advantages over beer and other forms of alcohol. One, as far as I know, there's only one way to consume a beer. If you can think of another way, I don't want to know about it. Cannabis is different. Cannabis is different. There's a multitude of ways to consume cannabis. People smoke it. You can vaporize it. Do you know about vaporization? You use dried cannabis, you put it in a vaporizer, you heat it, but you don't burn it, so there's no particulate matter, but you get all the effect of the cannabinoids and the terpenes. It can be consumed in infused beverages or edible forms. At Aurora, we've got a proprietary process that creates a sublingual wafer that you stick under your tongue, and it dissolves, and it has rapid onset of action. So there are many ways to consume cannabis. But then the real kicker, the biggest advantage that cannabis has over beer and wine and liquor, is about the experience. Now think about it, whether you have a beer or a glass of wine or a shot of liquor, the neurological effect, the experience of the consumer is always the same. It's a central nervous system depressant. It has disinhibiting effects, making people feel relaxed and talkative, and used in moderate doses, people find that rather pleasant. Good for alcohol. Cannabis. Once again, cannabis is a different kind of animal. Cannabis, depending on the combination of cannabinoids and the terpenes, those aromatic compounds that give each cannabis strain its distinctive smell and taste, depending on the combination of those cannabinoids and terpenes, cannabis can have a very wide range of effects. It can be uplifting and stimulating, perfect for a night out with your friends, or going to a football match to watch Bayern Munich lose. I'm kidding. I love Bayern Munich. I just happen to be more of a Barcelona fan. Sorry, I'm a soccer coach. We call it in Canada, soccer coach, so we do have our favorites in terms of how we like to train the kids. Cannabis can also give you a laid-back experience. So you stay home and watch, binge watch your favorite TV show. Or it can be perfect for an intimate evening with your partner. It can give you that wide range of experiences. And that's the word, the experience. The consumer experience is what's going to make cannabis so big. And then there are a whole bunch of other benefits as well. For one thing, anybody who is health conscious is going to be aware that if you have 4 or 5 beers on a Friday, well, you just consumed the equivalent of a meal. Cannabis-infused beverages, how many calories? 0. This will come into play. It's already coming into play. In states like Washington and Colorado, it's coming into play. This is going to be big. We're at the very outset of a global megatrend that's going to change the world in some very pleasant and positive ways. And the last thing that I want to say to you is about Aurora's role in that, because Aurora is going to be doing it. We're the company that's going to bring you the future of the cannabis sector. And we're going to do it in some very particular ways. Aurora is one of 120-something licensed producers, but there's no other company like Aurora. And there's no company that's doing the things that Aurora is doing. I'm not going to run you through a slide presentation. You've seen too many of those, and so have I. So what I'm going to tell you about is our production. And our production, our cultivation, is unique in the world. We are the only company in the world that is building massive scale indoor facilities with extremely tight environmental controls. There are other companies that are building large greenhouses. Lots of them. Everybody else who's building production at large scale in Canada is building very large greenhouses. And those are good. And some of those companies will do fine. One thing about greenhouses is they are relatively less expensive than the indoor facilities built to pharmaceutical grade that we do. So it's less expensive to build a large greenhouse or to retrofit one, which is what most people are doing. It's also faster. You can get into production faster by retrofitting a greenhouse than by building our massive indoor facilities. But our indoor facilities have got major advantages. Aurora Sky is something the world has never seen, and I was just there last week. Aurora Sky is what we call our facility at Edmonton International Airport. It is 800,000 square feet. Somebody do the math for me. I can't convert that into square meters. I'll put it this way. It's bigger than 16 football fields. It produces over 100,000 kilograms or 100 million grams of high-quality premium cannabis per year. And it does it consistently, and it does it with the highest production efficiency in the world, and it does it without the risk of crop loss. And if there are 2 words that chill the spine of cannabis executives more than anything else, it's crop loss. And chills the spine of savvy investors, too. Aurora was the first cannabis company in the world to achieve a large traditional debt facility with a tier 1 bank, a top-tier bank, Bank of Montreal in Canada. We received a loan, effectively, for $250 million. And the nice thing about that was, it wasn't just because Bank of Montreal liked our business plan and believed that we were going to be a global leader in this space. When a bank lends you $250 million, that's not their first concern. What's their first concern? Am I going to get it back? Right. That was their first concern. And what we effectively have done, and why they loaned us $250 million, is that we have de-risked the production of cannabis, which is the building block for everything that comes after. All the branding, all the promotion, all the sales, all the research, all of the other things that we're doing are built on a solid foundation of production, because you've got to have an economic source of the raw material for everything else you do. All the derivative products and the extraction, all of these things that we're also good at, all of that rests on the assumption that you will have a consistent, predictable source at low cost of the raw ingredient, meaning dried cannabis. And Aurora Sky is the first of a series of what we call Sky class facilities, unique in the world. A closed system with a glass roof. So we take advantage of the power of the sun, but we also have supplemental lighting. And because it's a closed system, it's not open to the air like a traditional greenhouse. So what does that mean? It means that the nasty things that keep cannabis cultivators awake at night can't blow in. Powdery mildew, black mold, other contaminants. They can't get in because our facility is a closed system with MERV level 14 air filtration. Inside our facility is the cleanest air you'll ever breathe. And we are able to get better than 6 growth cycles per year, all the same, all perfect, all premium quality, out of this concept that we have invented and pioneered. It's a proprietary approach. And the nice thing is, nobody else is doing it. Now, I could go on at length, and I won't, about all the other things that make Aurora special, about the fact that we're the most integrated cannabis company in the world in everything from design and engineering of new cannabis production facilities, through cultivation of cannabis and hemp, through extraction expertise, to our distribution channels. One of the smartest things we did was in the spring of 2017, we acquired a company called Pedanios, based in Berlin. It's the largest distributor of medical cannabis in Europe, and it's a deal that every other cannabis company wishes they had done. And so we now have a very, very smart, competent, capable, energetic, and imaginative group of young Germans scheming and planning how we're going to take over the medical cannabis system across Germany, across Europe, coming up with new ideas for distribution, new ideas for formulation, new partnerships and networks to enter into in country after country after country. It's happening from here. This is our base. We now have renamed Pedanios Aurora Deutschland, and our European headquarters is also in Germany. So not just our German headquarters, our European headquarters. And we're going to do this again and again and again. In Latin America, we just are in the process of acquiring a company called ICC Labs. It's the market leader in Latin America. It's based in Uruguay and Colombia, and it's brilliant. And now it adds us to our story. It adds access to low-cost, equatorial, outdoor-grown cannabis. And ICC has advantages over every other player in Latin America. The only extraction capability. Pretty soon, the only GMP lab. It goes on and on. This company, Aurora, we all work 7 days a week, and we don't resent it, because we love what we're doing. Because the work we're doing right now is the most engaging and creative work we've ever done in our careers. We are literally inventing a new global industry in real time. It's a hell of a lot of fun. And if you're not invested in us, I hope you'll consider it, because I'd like to have you along for the ride. Thank you very much for your kind attention.